Here's the claim. Martin Luther removed books from the Bible when he got rid of the apocrypha. One of the most frequently repeated claims in Roman Catholic apologetics is this idea that Martin Luther removed books from the Bible. It is often suggested that Protestants have a smaller biblical canon than the Roman Church solely because of Luther's personal decisions, often due to his supposed disagreement with these texts for some doctrinal matter. Now, this claim is misleading for several reasons. First, the status of what we call the Apocrypha was debated long before Luther and long before the Reformation. Church fathers like St. Jerome or Melito of Sardis or Athanasius provide lists of canonical books of the Old Testament which resemble the later Protestant canon far more than the current Roman canon regarding these texts. This tradition is reflected in the later Masoretic Hebrew canon, which became the basis for most Protestant Old Testament translations in the 16th and 17th centuries into the modern day. The Greek Old Testament, which is known as the Septuagint, did include the apocryphal texts. However, there is no unified Septuagint with one consistent list of books, especially regarding these particular books. The earliest editions that we have differ quite heavily, and at least one includes the apocryphal texts after the New Testament, thus clearly distinguishing those apocryphal texts from both testaments. This longer canon, which appears to some degree in this Septuagintal tradition, was adopted by St. Augustine most famously and became standard for much of the church, though this was not with unanimity. So by the time of the Reformation, some Renaissance scholars began looking at the Hebrew Old Testament rather than using what was common Latin Vulgate of this time. This led to the renewal of this ancient debate surrounding these particular books. Just as one example, Cardinal Cajetan, who was one of Luther's most significant Roman Catholic opponents, questioned the canonical status of the Apocrypha, as well as the authorship of the Book of James. Separate matter, but relevant. When the Reformers, therefore, adopted the smaller canon, they were not throwing out books of the Bible, but they were taking one side of what was an ongoing debate that had continued from the earliest days of the Church. Despite the common misconception that the Synod of Nicaea determined a list of scriptural books, the status of the apocryphal texts had never been determined by an ecumenical council. Well, there were some provincial or local councils that provided canonical lists, which were not binding on the whole church. The first council that was under the authority of the Bishop of Rome that made any official decision about this issue was after the Reformation, at the Council of Trent. Second, despite the fact that the Reformers did not generally affirm the inspiration of these texts in the same sense as the rest of either the Old Testament or the New Testament, early Protestant Bibles, including Luther's, did include the Apocrypha. They were, however, placed in a separate section from these other books, distinguishing them from the Old Testament books that were universally recognized by the Church. Nonetheless, despite their unfortunate neglect by much of the church today, these books were often used as secondary sources in theological argumentation. Read through some of the polemical writings just after the Reformation will show how often these texts were used to defend the doctrines of the Reformation. And so this then leads to a third point. At times, Roman Catholic apologists can speak about this issue as if Luther rejected the canonical authority of these texts due to some theological disagreement he supposedly found within them. Luther is portrayed in these arguments as this petty and selfish man who just threw out everything and anything that disagreed with his own opinions. Maybe he was so aggravated by the things he found in the Bible itself, especially in the Apocrypha and James, which is another question, that didn't affirm his ideas, that rather than submitting to Scripture, he just threw those books away. This is all a caricature. This is not true, especially as the Reformers regarded these texts quite highly. They cited them frequently, including within some of the confessions that arose out of the Reformation. Now, aside from one reference to almsgiving within the Book of Tobit, these books weren't really cited very frequently at all, even in defense of specific Roman dogmas in opposition to the Reformation. Well, thanks so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you have not already, and we'll see you in the next video. God bless.
you.